Most people crossing paths with a Hell's Angel in a gas station at midnight keep walking, eyes down, without deciding to. They see leather. They see ink. They see someone whose night is none of their business. A 9-year-old boy in a soaked jacket 2 sizes too big did not walk past. He walked straight up to the biggest rider filling his tank under the storm-lit awning, and with hands that would not stop shaking, he signed 6 words that had nothing to do with the weather. "He's not my father." Nash Griffin set the fuel nozzle down mid-fill and looked at the boy for a long moment before he answered. Not with his voice, but with his own hands, slow and careful. The first sign language he'd used in longer than he wanted to admit. Whatever Nash signed back would bring 150 Hell's Angels out into a storm that had already knocked out power to half the county. The storm had rolled into Caldwell County a little after 10 that night, the kind that arrived with no warning on the forecast and then refused to leave, dropping sheets of rain sideways under a sky that lit up green-white every few minutes, with lightning close enough to rattle the Travel Plaza's windows. Route 40 Travel Plaza sat off the interstate the way these places always did, built for people passing through at every hour. Though tonight the power had gone out twice already, and the pumps ran on a generator loud enough to compete with the thunder. Nash Griffin had pulled in 20 minutes earlier, riding through the worst of it, because stopping in open country during a lightning storm seemed, on balance, riskier than finishing the last 11 miles to the motel where his chapter had booked rooms for the night. He was 45, broad through the chest, a beard soaked flat against his jaw. A Hell's Angel for going on 20 years. His cut carried the patches of 2 decades on the road and, stitched small over his heart, a single word in sign language fingerspelling that most people never noticed and fewer still asked about. He had learned to sign at 11 years old. For his younger brother Danny, born deaf, the 2 of them inventing half their own vocabulary before either of them ever saw a proper ASL class. Danny had died at 19, a fever that turned to something worse almost overnight, and Nash had kept signing anyway, in empty rooms sometimes, in his own reflection, because the alternative felt too much like losing him twice. He still, some nights on long rides, caught himself signing lyrics to whatever song was stuck in his head. An old habit that had outlived every reason he'd originally had for starting it. He wanted, tonight, exactly one thing: to get his tank full and get back on the road before the worst of the lightning caught up to him again. He watched the boy cross the flooded lot toward him instead, caneless, sighted, but moving with the same over-careful attention Danny used to move with in a loud room, scanning, tracking, reading faces because the words themselves came slower. The boy's jacket was soaked through. His sneakers had no socks under them. He froze for half a second at the edge of the pump's light, the particular hesitation of a kid deciding whether a stranger this size was a risk worth taking. And then came the rest of the way anyway. His hands, when he lifted them to sign, were trembling hard enough that Nash almost missed the first word entirely. "You have to help me," the boy signed. "Please, slow down," Nash signed back, the motion coming out rustier than he remembered it, but there. "I'm listening. What's wrong?" Before we get to what this boy told Nash next, if this is your first time here, go ahead and hit subscribe so this story doesn't get lost in the feed, and drop your city or state down in the comments below. I read every single one, and it means more than you'd guess to see how far a story like this can travel on a night like tonight. Now, back to the storm at Route 40. Because what this 9-year-old boy had signed, standing soaked to the skin under a flickering gas station awning, was about to matter a great deal more than anyone filling up their tank that night could have guessed. His name was Theo Marsh. He was 9 years old, deaf since birth, and he had never spoken a single word out loud in his life, communicating entirely through sign and, when signing wasn't an option, through the small, determined patience of a kid who had spent his whole childhood finding ways to be understood by people who did not automatically understand him. 6 hours earlier, he had been in his own backyard in a town 40 miles east, waiting for his mother to finish a phone call inside, when a man he did not recognize had crouched down at the fence line and signed to him, badly, in broken, self-taught Assel, but well enough to say the 2 words that mattered most to a 9-year-old. Your mom. He'd said she was hurt. He'd said he was there to take Theo to her. He'd said it slow, deliberate, the way a person says something they've rehearsed specifically for this moment. And Theo, who had spent his whole life being pleasantly surprised whenever a stranger bothered to learn even a handful of signs, had not had any framework in his 9 years of experience for a stranger doing it for the wrong reasons. Theo had gone with him. He would spend a long time afterward turning that decision over, the way kids do, looking for the exact moment he should have known better. Though the truth, plain and simple, was that a stranger who bothered to learn even broken sign language specifically to speak to a deaf child was a kind of trap that almost nobody had ever prepared him for. The man's name, Theo had learned 6 hours in, was Roy. Roy did not know much sign language beyond that first practiced sentence, which meant that for 6 hours, in a car and then at 2 different gas stations, Theo had been unable to ask him anything at all, and Roy had not seemed particularly interested in finding out what Theo might have wanted to ask. Roy had told the cashier at the first gas station that Theo was his son, tired from a long drive. He had said the same thing at the second. He was preparing, Theo understood by the third stop, to say it again. Roy Marsh, the name Theo had heard him give the second cashier, though Theo's own last name was actually only Marsh. No Roy attached to it anywhere in his life until 6 hours ago. Pulled into Route 40 Travel Plaza a few minutes after Nash did, the storm having slowed his pace considerably on the back roads he'd been favoring since early evening. He parked at the pump 2 down from Nash's bike, told Theo to stay in the car in a tone that assumed compliance rather than requested it, and went inside for coffee and something to eat, leaving the boy alone in the passenger seat for the first unsupervised 90 seconds of the entire night. Theo did not waste any of them. He had spent 6 hours cataloging every adult he passed for the specific shape of a person who might actually help him, the way a kid learns to when the one adult in charge of him has stopped feeling safe to be around. A biker at a gas pump, soaked and enormous, and covered in the kind of ink that would have sent Theo's mother crossing the street on an ordinary day, had not been on his list of candidates until the moment he noticed the man's hand shift. Briefly, in a motion Theo recognized instantly and completely, the sign for storm, made without thinking, the way a person hums a song they don't realize they're humming. He was out of the car and across the flooded lot before he'd finished deciding to go. Roy came out of the store 4 minutes later, coffee in hand, scanning the lot the way a man scans a lot when the thing he is looking for should be exactly where he left it, and is not. He found Theo standing beside a biker's motorcycle instead, and something in his face did the fast recalibration of a man remembering, mid-stride, that he needed to look worried rather than furious. "There you are, buddy," he said it loud, easy, for the benefit of the cashier still visible through the store's front window. "Told you to stay in the car. Storm like this. You scared me." Theo's hands found Nash's forearm and gripped it. His hands whispered it out again, faster this time, the motion less careful and more urgent. "He's not my father. Please, he took me. My mom doesn't know where I am." Nash did not need every sign translated perfectly to understand the shape of what he was looking at. He had spent a childhood reading his brother's face for the parts language alone never covered, and Theo's face right now was doing all the work language would have done for a hearing child screaming the same 6 words. "He's confused," Roy said, closer now, still smiling for the cashier's benefit. "Doesn't talk. Doesn't always follow what's happening around him, if you know what I mean. I appreciate you keeping an eye on him, but I've got it from here." "Funny," Nash said. "He seems to be following this conversation fine." Roy's smile thinned by exactly 1 degree. "Excuse me?" "He told me you're not his father," Nash said. "Told me pretty clearly. For a kid, you say, doesn't follow things." Theo's grip on Nash's arm tightened further, his whole small frame gone rigid. The stillness of a child who has learned, over 6 increasingly wrong hours, exactly how dangerous it can be to be disbelieved in front of the one person capable of doing something about it. The lot around them had gone strangely silent under the drumming rain. The cashier's television murmuring faintly through the glass, everyone else at the pumps suddenly absorbed in their own vehicles. Nash had not decided anything yet, but something in him had already stopped being undecided. "He's a special needs kid," Roy said, his voice dropping into something harder now that the cashier's window had gone dark behind a flicker of the generator cutting briefly out. "He gets confused about who's who. It's part of the condition. I don't have to explain my own son's medical situation to a stranger at a gas pump." "Didn't ask you to," Nash said. "Asked him. He can't even talk." "Doesn't need to talk," Nash said. "Needs hands. His work fine." Roy reached for Theo's shoulder, and Nash, without appearing to hurry at all, shifted his own weight half a step to the left, close enough that Roy's hand found leather instead of the boy. "That's my son," Roy said, voice climbing now, losing the practiced warmth that had carried across 2 gas stations and 6 hours of highway. "You're interfering with a father and his kid. I could have you arrested." "Could," Nash said. "Might want to think through what a cop finds when they run your name against his mother's before you try it." Something in Roy's face went cold and careful at that. The specific stillness of a man recalculating, in real time, exactly how much of tonight had already gone wrong. The cashier had come to the door by then, phone raised, and lightning cracked close enough overhead that the whole lot went white for a full second before the thunder that followed rattled the pump's metal awning. "Give him back his phone," Nash said, "the one in your jacket. Kid's mother deserves to know he's breathing before anything else happens tonight." "I don't have his." "Wasn't a question," Nash said. Roy's hand went, instinctively, toward his jacket pocket, the specific reflex of a man confirming, without meaning to, exactly what he'd been trying to deny, and in that half-second, Theo's whole body sagged half an inch against Nash's side, the first give in his frame since the fence line 6 hours and 40 miles earlier. "You don't know what you're doing," Roy said, quieter now, meant for Nash alone. "Know exactly what I'm doing," Nash said. "Standing here till the sheriff shows up." Which, given the storms knocked half the county's power out, might take a minute. "So, we'll wait." "You think I'm going to stand here?" "Think you'd be smart to," Nash said. "Considering my chapter's about 11 miles out, already rerouted around the worst of this storm, and considering they'll be here before your options get any better than they are right now." Roy laughed, short and humorless, though something behind his eyes had already started doing arithmetic he did not like the shape of. "More bikers. Great. Exactly what this night needed." "Considerably more than you'd like," Nash said, and something in the flatness of his voice made the cashier lower her phone an inch, watching the two of them the way a person watches weather they can't yet read. For a moment the whole lot went nearly silent beneath the storm. Even the rain seemed to ease into something quieter. The generators hummed the loudest thing left in the world, and underneath the thunder, faint but building, there was a sound that had not been there a minute earlier. Theo felt it before anyone told him what it was. A vibration through the wet pavement into the soles of his sneakers, and looked up at his mother's absent voice, at the storm, at the stranger whose hands had understood him faster than anyone had in 6 hours, with an expression that was, for the first time all night, something other than afraid. Engines. That was the only word for it. Though Theo would later sign to his mother that no single word covered what he felt coming through the ground that night. The sound built beneath the storm itself, low and then lower. Then suddenly, everywhere at once, headlights cutting through sheets of rain and a column that did not stop growing. They came off the interstate ramp in a long unbroken line, chrome and rain throwing back the lightning in flashes, and they did not stop coming. 50, 100 more, the lot at Route 40, built to hold perhaps 20 vehicles, filled with motorcycles the way a storm drain fills in a downpour, fast, and then faster, and then, improbably, still, 150 of them, exactly, the number the county paper would confirm 2 days later, though nobody riding through that storm had needed to count to know it mattered. They killed their engines in overlapping waves, rain hammering down on leather and chrome, and the quiet that followed was somehow louder than the storm itself had been a moment earlier. 150 riders standing in the downpour beside their bikes, soaked through, utterly silent, waiting on a 9-year-old boy the way people wait outside an emergency room for news. A man walked forward from the crowd, rain sheeting off a bald head, a road captain's patch dark with water on his cut, and found Nash's eyes before anyone else's. "You good, Nash?" he asked. "I'm good, Ortiz," Nash said. He's not, yet kid's been 6 hours with a stranger who took him off his own mother's fence line. Ortiz's eyes moved to Theo for the first time. Soaked jacket, no socks. Hands still gripping Nash's cut like it was the only solid thing left standing in the storm. And whatever hard weather-worn calm sat in Ortiz's face gave way to something else entirely. He crouched down anyway, rain running off him in sheets, until he was at Theo's eye level, and raised both hands to sign, slow and careful, the way a person signs when they've only ever learned a handful of words but mean every one of them completely. "You, safe." Now Theo's hands moved back at him, fast, uncertain whether a stranger this size could possibly understand what he needed to say, and Ortiz, who did not, looked to Nash for the translation. "He says thank you," Nash said. "And that he wants his mom." "Both reasonable requests," Ortiz said, "both already in motion." Roy Marsh, a name Theo now understood had never belonged to the man at all, looked out at 150 motorcycles filling a flooded gas station lot he had nowhere left to drive out of, and did not wait for the sheriff who was, by then, a little over 4 minutes out despite the storm. He sat down on the wet curb beside his own car instead, and did not say another word until the deputy arrived. The deputy who eventually made it through the storm found more than enough waiting for him. A soaked cashier's video, 150 witnesses, and a boy whose account, delivered entirely through signs that a chapter member happened to know well enough to translate on the spot, matched every detail his mother would later confirm through tears at the county sheriff's office. The man calling himself Roy Marsh was arrested that night on charges that would grow considerably once his actual identity and his actual history came back from the state database 3 days later. A history that included 2 prior restraining orders from families in 2 other counties, neither of which the local school district's visitor logs had ever been built to catch. The investigating detective would later note, in her report, that the man had specifically targeted a nonverbal child, calculating, correctly for 6 hours, that it would take Theo considerably longer to make himself understood to anyone in a position to help. Theo's mother, Denise, arrived at the sheriff's office a little after 2 in the morning Having driven through the same storm at speeds she would later admit to a deputy she had no memory of choosing. And the sound she made finding her son sitting wrapped in a spare Hell's Angels jacket 3 sizes too big for him was not one either of them would ever need translated for the other to understand. She knelt in front of him and whispered his name even though she knew, better than anyone in that building, that he could not hear a single syllable of it, because some things get said anyway, for the person saying them as much as for anyone meant to receive them. Nash did not stay for the paperwork. He gave his statement, made sure Theo had a dry blanket and something warm to drink, and got back on his bike once the worst of the lightning had passed, the same way he left most things, without ceremony, without needing to be thanked twice for a decision that had, in the end, taken him less than a minute to make. He visits sometimes now, when his route allows it, and he and Theo have slowly been building a shared vocabulary, the way Nash once built one with his brother. New signs, invented ones. The specific grammar 2 people develop when they've decided a relationship is worth the extra effort of understanding each other completely. Theo still keeps the stuffed rabbit he had with him that night, ear chewed soft from years of anxious habit, tucked now on a shelf rather than carried everywhere. Because these days there is considerably less in his life that requires constant holding on to. He does not think of himself as brave. He thinks of himself as someone who happened to notice a stranger's hand make one familiar shape in the rain and trusted it enough to bet everything on what it meant. If this story reached you, if you believe the world moves too fast to properly listen, to deserve someone willing to slow down and actually watch their hands, share it with someone who needs the reminder that safety sometimes speaks a language most of us never bothered to learn. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from tonight. What town? What state? What the weather's doing where you are? And if you believe Theo deserved every one of those 150 engines showing up in that storm, type witnessed below so he knows it reached you too.